April 17, 1398. Outside the walls of Delhi, the air is already hot. Dust hangs low over the plain like a suffocating curtain. War drums echo across the Yamuna River valley. Thousands of soldiers stand in tense silence. Then the elephants begin to move. Massive war elephants, armored, painted, their tusks tipped with steel, lurch forward through the morning haze. Towers strapped to their backs sway as archers prepare to fire down into the advancing enemy ranks. Their handlers drive iron spikes into thick skulls to push them faster. Across the field, another army watches. Not Indian, not Persian, not Arab steppe warriors. Horsemen wrapped in lamella armor, bows already strung, horses restless beneath them. At their center sits a man whose limp has become legend, Timur, known to history as Tamerlane. He watches the elephants without fear. Any ordinary army would break. Horses panic at the smell alone. Entire cavalry formations have collapsed at the sight of charging elephants, but Timur does not retreat. But he gives a quiet order. Within minutes, camels are driven forward from the rear lines, their backs piled with dry brushwood and straw. Torches are lit. The camels begin to burn, screaming. Flaming animals are driven directly toward the advancing elephants. The battlefield erupts in chaos. Elephants panic. They turn. They trample their own infantry. Entire formations collapse under tons of uncontrolled flesh and armor. Timur's cavalry moves instantly. Thousands of mounted archers surge forward in perfect coordination. Arrows darken the sky. Delhi is about to fall. But this moment, this terrible, brilliant moment, raises a deeper question. How did a crippled warlord from the Central Asian steppe build an empire through terror so immense that entire cities surrendered before he even arrived? And more unsettling still, what happens when a conqueror who has never lost a war begins to believe he cannot? This is the story of the last great steppe conqueror, the wars of Timur. The world Timur was born into was already fractured. The Mongol Empire, the largest land empire in human history, had begun to crumble long before his birth in 1336. Once united under the iron authority of Genghis Khan and his immediate heirs, the empire had splintered into competing khanates. Each claimed the legacy of Mongol supremacy. None could truly control it. Across Central Asia, the region known as Transoxiana had become a patchwork of tribal factions, shifting loyalties, and decaying authority. Nomadic warlords fought over grazing lands and caravan routes. Cities like Samarkand and Bukhara remained wealthy, but power in the countryside belonged to whoever could command the strongest cavalry. The old Mongol aristocracy still held prestige, but their authority had weakened. Real power increasingly belonged to ambitious military leaders who operated behind puppet cons. Trade caravans still crossed the Silk Road, carrying silk, spices, silver, and knowledge between east and west, but the security that once defined Mongol rule had vanished. Banditry increased, borders hardened. Beyond Central Asia, powerful states were rising. To the west, the Ottoman Turks expanded steadily across Anatolia and into the Balkans, defeating Christian armies and threatening Constantinople itself. To the north, the Golden Horde dominated the Russian steppe, extracting tribute from emerging principalities like Moscow. To the south, Persia was fractured into competing dynasties, struggling to fill the vacuum left by the collapse of earlier Mongol regimes. And farther still, the Delhi Sultanate ruled northern India, but its leadership had become unstable, weakened by court intrigue and provincial rebellions. The balance of power across Eurasia was unstable. Every major state was watching its neighbors, waiting. Into this fractured world stepped Timur. He was not born into royalty. He belonged to the Balis tribe, a Turkicized Mongol clan that claimed distant lineage from Genghis Khan's armies but lacked the sacred bloodline required to rule as Khan. This mattered. In the political culture of the steppe, legitimacy was everything. Only descendants of Genghis Khan could claim the title of supreme ruler. Timur understood this early. If he could not inherit legitimacy, he would manufacture it. He would rule through puppet khans while holding real authority himself. But first he had to survive. As a young man, Timur grew up in a world defined by raiding warfare. Tribal conflicts were constant. Alliances shifted weekly. Loyalty was temporary. During one skirmish in his youth, Timur was struck by arrows that crippled his right leg and damaged his hand. The injury left him permanently lame. Enemies would later mock him as Timur the Lame Tamerlane, but the injury did not weaken him, it hardened him. Those who fought beside him noticed something immediately. Timur was not simply brave. Many steppe warriors were brave. He was calculating, patient, and terrifyingly observant. He studied the tactics of earlier Mongol commanders obsessively. The lightning cavalry raids, the feigned retreats, the discipline of mounted archers firing in perfect rotation. But he also improved them. He introduced stricter command structures, coordinated signal systems using drums, banners, and messengers, specialized units trained for siege warfare, something many steppe armies struggled with. Most importantly, Timur understood psychology. War was not only about defeating armies, it was about destroying the enemy's will to resist. And for that, fear was the most efficient weapon ever invented. By the 1360s, Timur had begun consolidating power across Transoxiana. He did not declare himself king. Instead, he installed a puppet, descendant of Genghis Khan, as nominal ruler while he commanded the armies. One rival after another disappeared. Some were defeated in battle. Others simply vanished. Within a decade, Timur controlled the region surrounding Samarkand, the city he would transform into the glittering capital of his empire. But he had no intention of stopping there. To the west lay Persia, rich cities, agricultural wealth, ancient prestige. To the north stood the Golden Horde, one of the most powerful Mongol successor states. To the south stretched India, with its legendary riches. And beyond them all stood the Ottomans, rising faster than any power in the Islamic world. Timur looked at this map of rival powers and saw not threats but opportunities. Before launching his greatest campaigns, Timur prepared carefully. He restructured his military into highly mobile divisions capable of operating independently across enormous distances. Each unit carried multiple horses, allowing riders to switch mounts and travel at incredible speeds. His logistics system relied heavily on mobility and local supply. Armies could move hundreds of miles across steppe and desert with minimal baggage. Scouts operated constantly ahead of the main force, gathering intelligence about enemy movements, terrain, and city defenses. Deception became routine. Timur's forces frequently staged fake retreats, luring enemies into traps. Spies infiltrated rival courts. False messages were planted. Enemy alliances were quietly undermined. Geography became a weapon. Steppe cavalry moved fastest across open terrain. Timur deliberately chose battlefields where mobility would give him decisive advantage. When cities resisted, the consequences were legendary. Entire populations were massacred. Pyramids of skulls were constructed outside city gates. These were not acts of uncontrolled brutality. They were calculated signals. Surrender quickly, or be erased. The strategy worked. Many cities opened their gates before Timur even arrived. By the 1380s, his armies had swept through Persia, capturing Isfahan, Shiraz, and other major cities. Each victory strengthened his reputation and his ambition, but one rival refused to submit: Toktamish, ruler of the Golden Horde. At first, Toktamish had actually been Timur's ally. Timur helped him seize power within the horde, but alliances on the steppe rarely lasted. Soon Toktamish turned against his former patron, launching raids into Timur's territories. The betrayal infuriated him. War became inevitable. The conflict between Timur and Toktamish would become one of the largest steppe wars since the age of Genghis Khan. In 1391, their armies finally met. The battlefield stretched across the vast grasslands near the Volga River. Hundreds of thousands of cavalry maneuvered across open steppe. For hours, the two forces probed each other's lines. Arrows flew. Feigned retreats unfolded. Wings advanced and collapsed. Then Timur launched the decisive maneuver. A massive reserve force hidden beyond the horizon swept into the enemy flank. Toktamish's army collapsed, but Timur did not stop with victory. He pursued relentlessly. Cities belonging to the Golden Horde were burned. Trade centers along the Volga were destroyed. The Horde's economic foundation, its control of Silk Road trade routes, was shattered. The once dominant Northern Empire never fully recovered. This single campaign reshaped the political future of Eastern Europe and Russia. With the north broken, Timur turned south. India. The Delhi Sultanate still controlled enormous wealth, but its political structure had weakened. Regional governors challenged central authority. Rebellions erupted frequently. Timur saw vulnerability. In 1398, he launched one of the most infamous invasions in medieval history. His army crossed the Indus River and began advancing toward Delhi. Resistance collapsed quickly. Cities that resisted were annihilated. Others surrendered immediately after hearing the stories. As Timur approached Delhi itself, Sultan Mahmud Tughlaq assembled a large defensive army. War elephants formed the center of the line. Infantry packed tightly behind them. Archers filled the towers mounted on the elephants' backs. Against most armies, this formation was devastating, but Timur adapted. He ordered camels loaded with combustible material driven forward and set on fire. The flaming animals panicked the elephants. The beasts turned back into their own ranks. The defensive formation disintegrated. Timur's cavalry surged through the chaos. The battle lasted hours. By sunset, the Delhi army was gone. What followed was catastrophic. Timur's forces looted the city for days. Contemporary sources describe mass killings on a scale that stunned even hardened chroniclers of medieval warfare. The wealth extracted from Delhi flowed back to Samarkand, funding monumental architecture and transforming the city into one of the greatest capitals of the era. But Timur's ambitions were still expanding. To the west, another rising power had begun to dominate the Middle East: the Ottoman Empire. Under Sultan Bayezid I, known as Bayezid the Thunderbolt, the Ottomans had crushed multiple European crusades and expanded rapidly across Anatolia and the Balkans. Bayezid was a brilliant commander, fast, aggressive, confident. Some would say too confident. Inevitably, their spheres of influence collided. Minor border disputes escalated. Diplomatic messages became insults. Neither man was willing to back down. In 1402, two of the most formidable military leaders of the medieval world prepared for confrontation. The armies gathered near the city of Ankara. Timur's force consisted largely of experienced cavalry veterans hardened by decades of campaigning. Bayezid commanded a diverse army: elite janissaries, Anatolian cavalry, Balkan infantry, and allied contingents from across his empire. The Ottomans had one key advantage: discipline. But Timur had something else: preparation. Days before the battle, Timur's engineers diverted local water sources, leaving Bayezid's army thirsty under the brutal Anatolian summer sun. Then he began negotiations, not sincere negotiations, delays. Every hour weakened the Ottoman position. Finally, the battle began. At dawn, dust clouds rose as cavalry units clashed along the wings. Arrows darkened the sky. Timur's forces began their familiar pattern of mobile harassment, striking, withdrawing, striking again. But then something unexpected happened. Several Turkic contingents within Bayezid's army, soldiers with cultural ties to Central Asia, defected to Timur's side mid-battle. The Ottoman formation fractured. Bayezid attempted to stabilize the line with his elite janissaries. They fought fiercely, but Timur's cavalry encircled them. By evening, the Ottoman army was destroyed. Bayezid himself was captured. It was one of the most shocking defeats in Ottoman history. The empire entered a decade-long civil war, known as the Ottoman Interregnum. European states, terrified for decades by Ottoman expansion, suddenly found themselves with breathing room. All because two warlords met on the Anatolian plains. But even conquerors make mistakes. Timur's greatest strategic miscalculation was not on the battlefield, it was in succession. Despite building one of the most powerful empires of his time, he never established a stable system for transferring power after his death. His empire relied almost entirely on his personal authority, his reputation, his fear. When Timur died in 1405 while preparing for a campaign against Ming China, the structure he built began to fracture almost immediately. His sons and grandsons fought bitterly for control. The empire splintered within decades. Most of Timur's vast conquests had slipped away, yet his legacy endured. The destruction of the Golden Horde accelerated the rise of Moscow and the eventual emergence of Russia as a major power. His defeat of the Ottomans delayed their expansion into Europe for a generation. His campaigns reshaped trade routes across Central Asia, and his descendants would leave their own mark on history. One of them, Babur, would later found the Mughal Empire in India, ruling vast territories that Timur himself had once ravaged. Timur also influenced the psychology of warfare. He demonstrated that terror, used systematically, could function as a strategic tool. Entire populations surrendered simply because they feared the consequences of resistance. Modern historians debate the ethics of this approach, but its effectiveness is undeniable. Military planners still study his campaigns for lessons in mobility, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare. Yet there is a darker question that lingers over his story. Timur won almost every battle he fought. He destroyed empires. He humbled kings. He built a capital that dazzled travelers for centuries. And still the empire he forged collapsed almost immediately after his death. It raises a haunting possibility. Perhaps the greatest conquerors are not those who win the most wars, but those who build something that survives them. Timur built an empire of fear. Fear can conquer cities. It can break armies, but fear alone rarely survives the man who created it. And so the last great conqueror of the steppe, who once commanded armies across half of Eurasia, left behind a legacy both immense and fragile. A shadow of war stretching across continents. And a final unanswered question. If Timur had lived just a few more years and marched east into China as he planned, would history remember him not merely as the last great steppe conqueror, but as the ruler who rebuilt the Mongol Empire itself?